Have you ever thought about that razor-thin line between being charming and, well, being controlling? Today, we're diving headfirst into the super controversial world of dark psychology. It's a term that has just exploded online, especially when it comes to dating. We're going to look at the tactics people are being taught to create attraction, and then we're going to hold them right up next to the clinical definitions of psychological manipulation. All right, let's get into it.
And that really brings us to the big question for this whole explainer. Is psychology a tool we use for real, genuine connection, or can it turn into a kind of blueprint for control? The techniques we're about to explore, they live right in that murky gray area. So first things first, let's open up the playbook. A ton of modern dating advice leans on these very specific psychological triggers. The whole promise is that you can basically bypass someone's logical brain and create this deep, almost primal kind of attraction. So let's take a look at what these techniques actually are.
This quote, wow, it really gets right to the heart of the whole philosophy. The idea here is that attraction isn't some rational pros and cons list decision. Nope, it's a gut-level emotional response. And if you know which buttons to press, you can supposedly spark that response whenever you want. One of the most talked about techniques is something called the push-pull method.
Okay, so the push-pull is all about creating an emotional roller coaster. First, you give someone tons of positive attention and warmth. You make them feel really seen and wanted. That's the push. Then, right when they're feeling good and comfortable, you subtly pull back. You get a little distant, a little harder to pin down. That's the pull. The sources claim this cycle creates this addictive kind of emotional tension that keeps the other person just constantly thinking about you, trying to solve the puzzle.
Now this builds on another huge idea, the power of scarcity. This is a classic principle, not just in psychology, but in economics too. We are just fundamentally wired to want things that are rare or things we have to work for, right? When something's just always there for the taking, we can start to take it for granted.
And here's exactly how that idea gets put into practice in dating. The advice is to literally make your time and your attention feel like a prize, not something they're entitled to. By not always being available, you're introducing scarcity. Suddenly, your presence is way more valuable because it's not a guarantee. It totally flips the dynamic. They start to feel like they need to earn your focus.
Another really powerful tactic is what they call creating a curiosity gap. Think about your favorite TV show, right? The writers don't just give you all the answers in the first episode. They leave you with cliffhangers. That space between what you know and what you desperately want to know, that's what keeps you hooked. The exact same idea is applied here. By being a little mysterious, by not putting all your cards on the table at once, you keep someone mentally leaning in, always trying to figure you out.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting. The very sources that teach these things often come with their own warning label. There's this acknowledgement that, yeah, these are powerful tools, and you can use them to build something real, but they can also be seriously misused. And this right here is where our whole explainer pivots. So, this is the million-dollar question. Where exactly is that line? When does a clever strategy to create attraction cross over into a pattern of psychological abuse? To get an answer, we have to put down the dating advice and pick up the clinical psychology textbooks.
In this next section, we're going to explore the formally recognized patterns of manipulation. And just to be clear, these aren't tricks or hacks. These are documented behaviors that are often linked to emotional abuse. And the first one we absolutely have to understand is gaslighting.
You know, the term gaslighting actually comes from a 1938 play called Gaslight. In it, a husband tries to convince his wife she's going insane by secretly dimming the gas lights in their house, and then, when she points it out, he denies it's even happening. And that's the core of it, really. It's all about systematically breaking down someone's trust in their own reality.
Okay, let's put these two ideas side by side for a second. On one hand, you have the dating trick, the curiosity gap, where you intentionally hold back information to create intrigue. On the other hand, you have gaslighting, which is about actively denying and twisting information to make someone doubt their own sanity. Now, the intent might seem different, but you can see how both tactics work by controlling information to get a specific psychological result from another person. It's a slippery slope.
So what kind of person tends to rely on these more extreme tactics? See, clinical psychology doesn't just look at the behaviors themselves, it also digs into the underlying personality traits that often drive them.
And yeah, the research consistently connects these kinds of manipulative behaviors to some pretty specific personality types. They're often grouped together under a name you might have heard before, the dark triad.
So the dark triad is basically this constellation of three separate but often overlapping personality traits. And look, we might all show a little bit of these behaviors from time to time, but when we talk about the dark triad, we're talking about cases where these traits are really pronounced and are a consistent part of who a person is.
This table breaks it down pretty clearly. You've got narcissism, which is all about that inflated sense of self-importance, a deep need for admiration, and a real lack of empathy for other people. Then you have Machiavellianism. That's someone who is cynical, super strategic, and totally willing to manipulate people to get what they want. And finally, psychopathy, which is characterized by a lack of remorse, being impulsive, and general antisocial behavior.
Now, let's bring this all the way back to those tactics we started with. Remember the push-pull method, that cycle of being warm and then suddenly going cold? Now, compare that to a known pattern in abusive relationships called psychopathic bonding. It's a cycle of idealization, what people call love bombing, where you're showered with affection, followed by devaluation, where you're suddenly criticized and tossed aside. It creates this incredibly powerful and traumatic bond. The pattern, it's disturbingly similar, isn't it?
So, after all of that heavy information, the key question becomes, how do you actually tell the difference in your own life? This isn't about trying to diagnose anyone. It's about recognizing patterns of behavior that are just plain red flags for your own emotional health.
So, really, the most important thing you can do is focus on how the dynamic makes you feel. Are you constantly feeling off balance, anxious, or just confused? Do you find yourself second-guessing your own memory or perceptions? Are you on an emotional roller coaster of insane highs followed by crushing lows? Those feelings, that's your data. A consistent pattern of feeling emotionally exhausted is a huge sign that something is wrong, no matter what label you put on it. And this really brings us to the ultimate takeaway here. Learning about this stuff isn't about making you paranoid or unable to trust anyone. It's actually the opposite. It's about empowerment. It's about having the knowledge to choose and build relationships that are based on something real, on authenticity and mutual respect, where connection doesn't have to be manufactured with psychological games.
Which leaves us with one final thought to really chew on. In a world that's packed with advice on how to be more charming, more attractive, how to connect with people faster, maybe the most important skill is the one that gets the least attention. How do we simply protect our own sense of what's real?